All right, RPG enthusiasts, incoming comments, incoming question. Fritz, we're talking about D&D, you're talking about D&D. You've referenced other role-playing systems. What else are you playing right now? What else are you exploring? So let's take a look at that and push that up to the archive. I started with AD&D, and certainly from a role-playing perspective, Dungeons & Dragons has had the biggest influence, both in my understanding of fantasy, both in my understanding in role-playing games, but also social interaction with the community, simply because so many people play it. It's pretty easy to build a group. It's pretty easy to join a group. And if you're going to launch a group from scratch, jump into playing D&D, it is much easier than exploring some other role-playing systems that are out there. So I'd say the bulk of my gaming career has been D&D, and certainly I'm very comfortable with it, and I've been able to explore and write a lot of adventures for it. But there are some other systems that I enjoy, and there are some other systems that get played for a variety of reasons. We were playing AD&D, and at the time, we then jumped into Star Frontiers. Now, this is going way back. And Star Frontiers was really my first jump into not only something other than D&D, although it was TSR. It was this idea that alternate dice systems using D10. Star Frontiers had ability checks, and you passed or failed based on 100 points, 2D10 system on there. And it was different. And it was something that at first I had a little bit of resistance to it, but it showed me that there were alternative rule sets out there that could potentially be just as interesting with it. Not to mention the sci-fi setting, which we loved, and the focus of mainly ranged combat versus close combat. Did a lot. Played Nighthawks, had my own frigate on there, and just really had a lot of fun in the Star Frontiers type universe. This then led us into Rolemaster. And what I remember about Rolemaster was just, I loved the detail of the combat. But it just seemed, and I don't mean this as a criticism, I know it's a great system, there's a lot of fans out there. It just seemed like, let's set up and fight. And you kind of watched the crits happen and the different parts of your body that took damage. You'd get hit with a sword, then you'd go to this chart and you'd roll because it's an edged weapon and a slashing weapon, and where did it hit and what effects. It got pretty detailed on there. That was like 99% of the game. And I was like, hey, where's the role playing? Now, maybe we didn't get into the system long enough to really explore that out because we spent a lot of time learning the actual mechanics. But that had an interesting effect on me because it pointed out that a role-playing game doesn't have to be heroic. You can be a normal person in there. I mean, certainly AD&D is very lethal. If you have the chance to play AD&D or you've played it, you know that your character is really kind of a mercenary, kind of a person in training on there, and you grow in power. But even growing powerful and growing in power, there's a lot of monsters. Half the stuff in the monster manual will take you out no matter what you are. I mean, it is lethal, and that's before we get into the dungeons and exploring. Look at some of the classic early modules. They would wipe the floor with 99% of the players out right now because nothing is handed to you. It's really, character death was insane. Now, compare that to D&D now. Really, does anyone ever die? And if you do die, you just get resurrected. True res is everywhere on there. And the players go up in power so fast, at a certain point, nothing in the monster manual is even really a threat anymore. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I kind of enjoy it because it allows you to play on a superhero mode, and it allows you to kind of really explore and become really, really legendary and powerful. I do believe it makes the DM's job a little bit more challenging. But Rolemaster was this first introduction to, like, if it goes to combat and I get into a fight, I'm probably going to die, or I'm going to be really, really crippled and messed up and not be able to fight again. And we're already like 3 weeks, 4 weeks in with this character. Do I really want to do that? It was a very different perspective. So we played those two systems for a little bit, then jumped back into D&D. We're playing AD&D Second Edition. We're playing D&D 3.x on there, and then I get introduced to GURPS, and GURPS really kind of threw me because there's no background. It's a rule set, and you can generic universal role playing system. It could be sci-fi, it could be modern, it could be Western, it could be cyberpunk, it could be anything on there. And now there's different game modules and background books to make you do this, to allow you to explore that. But the core set is like, hey, here's the rules, go to town as a DM. And this was my first encounter without classes. And that really threw me for a loop. So we can see this idea of whatever your first role-playing system is, that's literally your genesis. That's literally how you're going to filter out every future game that you come across and just what's normal or what you perceive as normal on there. So we're playing GURPS, and what do you mean I don't have a character class? What do you mean I have quirks and flaws, and that gets me points, and then I can evolve and buy more, or I can start pushing my character in one direction and then get skills in another direction? It was a little bit overwhelming because it wasn't restrictive on it. What's interesting, I guess we won't name names, but we can certainly talk about it. What was interesting, the Game Master, I was going to say Dungeon Master, I played the Game Master, and my two friends were playing that early on, and I said, well, I don't have any idea what the heck I'm doing, because I'm used to playing fantasy sci-fi. What kind of world do you guys want to play in? What do we want to do with this? What do you want to be? And they wanted to play a modern game, and we eventually had 4 players for it. And this was my first time into modern. They were going to be FBI agents, where they had just completed training, schooling, whatever we're going to call it. We had no idea. And now they're out on assignment, and the idea was they were going to become corrupt and see how far they could go and how much they could get away with before they got caught. And it was pretty interesting from that dynamic. And you know who I'm talking about, buddy. I love you, but I just find it ironic that later, all these years later, you went into the FBI and the service on there with that. So just really kind of neat with that. Played GURPS. I haven't played GURPS in many, many, many years on there. So how it's evolved out, I can't really say. So we've got AD&D. Then at some point, AD&D, D&D, I like 4.0. I say it in many videos. It's good for what it is. 5.0, I like it. When we get 6.0 in another year, okay. At some point, I started playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Now, some of you out there listening to this podcast, your ears just perked up on there. You're like, wow, okay, Fritz knows the glory of this amazing system. Fritz understands. But now I'm going to commit total heresy and say 3rd edition on there. I liked the custom dice of Fantasy Flight. I liked the abstract movement system. I liked kind of the power-ups on there. A lot of people say it was essentially a board game, reimaged as a role-playing game. I enjoyed it. From the perspective of a DM and the players, I have to say, now we spent like 5 or 6 minutes here in this podcast, me saying D&D I love, and that's the focus of my games. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay would be my ideal gaming system. It would. I love the narrative of the old world before Games Workshop totally destroyed it. Long live the old world. I like the fact that you don't have it pulls in the best of all these different systems. You don't have a character class. You're born into some occupation, and it could be a wizard apprentice, it could be a rat catcher, it could be an agitator, it could be a person at arms, a fighter, a warrior on there, and that's just where you start. And now you venture out into the world. So you sort of have a class, but then you get to go in any direction that you want for your skills. And you take these dice that are not only success or failure, right? In D&D, it's success or failure. Yes, we can do critical hits. Yes, we can do critical fumbles. But it's very binary, yes or no. And it pulls it out based on D4, D6, D8, D20. It spreads the yes or no out. But Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd Edition, you take some dice that represent your abilities. They have various symbols on them. The DM takes dice and adds it to a pool that represents the forces working against you. You roll it out. Not only is it success or failure, but it's different degrees, and you can succeed while still failing. And the elements that it opens up in the storytelling are literally so amazing. As a DM, I find it very interesting because I don't really know what's going to happen. So here's a great example of the success or fail. You come up to a door, and you've listened to the door. You think something's behind the door. You don't really know what. You're going to bash down the door. So you look at your attributes. You look at your abilities. You build a dice pool. So Star Wars fans are like, yeah, we know this system, right? You pull out some dice, and so you have 2 or 3 dice that represent your ability. If you get 2 or 3 success symbols on there, little hammers, you succeed, you bash down the door. Not overly hard. But then I add in opposition dice. So we look at the scenario, and maybe I say, well, look, it's the door is heavy wood. It's reinforced iron. It's not to say it's impossible, but you're going to have to put a little weight behind it. So I give you a die that the symbols are going to subtract from your dice. If it was much harder, like a stone door or mud on the ground, maybe I'll add 2 other dice onto it. So we have dice that oppose. Then we roll this dice, and based on the symbols, it's possible for you to succeed but also activate negative or positive effects. And it's up to the DM to interpret them based on the scenario. So in D&D, I want to break down the door. Okay, I calculate in my mind, let's say it's DC 15, but the door is a little bit old, so DC 12, I don't tell you that. You roll a D20, you add your strength, you break the door down or you fail. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you can break down the door and do it in such a way that you continue onward through the room, right? You got a running head start, and you smashed into that door, you smashed through the door, and inside are a bunch of goblins playing dragon dice, and you run into their table and you smash over their table and you knock them over. I mean, you succeed so amazing that it's also kind of a failure on there. A lot of really different things. It could be as you're running up, you could pass, but it could still be a failure. As you're running up to the door, at that moment, the goblins, they heard something outside the door, and literally the timing is as you're about to smash into it, they open the door, and you kind of breeze past them. Right? A lot of interesting things as the DM you don't really know. So I really, really love the dice mechanics on there. I love the character mechanics. Pulling in from Rollmaster, it is lethal. It is lethal. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay combat, you have to be on top of everything. You have to be tactical. You have to be making decisions. It's easy to get messed up. And while magic exists in the game, it's very rare. No one really knows it. It's viewed with superstition, so there's no healing pots. There's no automatic resurrect. There's no I've got 100 hit points and I just got hit with 4 swords, an axe, and 10 arrows, and I'm still fighting. Like, it is insane. You go up against some of the monsters in there, and all the monsters are dangerous. All the monsters are truly terrifying. If you fight a direwolf in D&D, once you hit like level 2 or 3, am I even really worried? Like, okay, you're going to really make me roll the dice and see what happens? I auto-kill it. I just auto-pass on there. You fight a direwolf in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. At whatever level you're at, you're like, I don't know. I should just like run up a tree or something like that, or go hide in the house or just something on there. A lot of very, very interesting dynamics on there. That would be my first choice. I love D&D. I really do. I mean, I'm running a D&D campaign right now. I'm playing in a campaign. I'm playing online. I love D&D, the narrative, the characters. I'm running my monk. But if you had to put me on that virtual island to play, it would be Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, 3rd edition. So 2 other subsystems worth mentioning on here. Dark Heresy. So certainly if you've been following my channel, you know I love Warhammer 40,000. It's a big part of my life in the various armies, building, painting, collecting tactics, playing with friends. It's occupied a lot, and it's given me a lot of great memories and a lot of great interactions. So why not play role-playing? Dark Heresy is role-playing in the Warhammer 40K universe. And I enjoyed playing it from the perspective of that essentially it was Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition reskinned for space. So all the mechanics are the same. It's very, very lethal. Magic is called Psychic Powers, very lethal on there. Very grimdark, very gothic. You play Inquisitor acolytes, basically troubleshooters going out. Some of you might have just picked up on that word, troubleshooters, with what's going to happen next. And you'd go out and play. The challenge I found with it was, as a role-playing game, it was almost like a failure in that, and I don't mean the narrative, I don't mean the presentation, it was great, but Warhammer 40,000, if you're not familiar with it, its narrative and lore is very, very deep on there. It makes Lord of the Rings lore look like baby cakes. So I tried to bring this game system to play at a club or role-playing night. No one's played before. I have pre-generated characters. Nothing makes sense whatsoever. Trying to explain to someone you're a tech priest, trying to explain to someone about chaos, trying to explain to someone about the Inquisition and how the ends justify any type of means on there. Like, it just didn't work. Where you sit down to play D&D, whether you're doing Mysteria, Forgotten Realms, whatever you're playing, generic Your World, everyone understands fighters and wizards and elves and dwarfs and dragons and magic items and spells. It's just in our genesis. It's just in our culture on there. Dark Heresy was such a subset. It's crazy. On the opposite side, when I would bring it, so you'd say, well, Fritz, you got a target-made audience here with 40K players because they know the lore so well. Once they can immerse in, like that's golden. That would be like hooking up with D&D players that know every single thing about the Forgotten Realms. Most of my gaming time is spent in the Forgotten Realms. That's why I use that as an example. Well, what I found was that whenever I would try to hook up with the guys playing 40K, bringing in Dark Heresy, 90% of the time they were like, why don't we just play regular 40K and make some little role play out of it? I want to play with my miniatures on there. Or they didn't even understand a role-playing game, because certainly there's some crossover in every community, but I would say a majority of 40K players are not necessarily role players. So it's a game that struggled to find where it lives on there. So I enjoyed it, but it's, out of all the role-playing systems that I've played, it's gotten the least amount of play. The last one, some troubleshooters. I need some troubleshooters. The computer is your friend. You don't have color clearance for that. You're part of a secret society. And how do you know that classified information? Let's just start with that. You have 30 seconds to explain it. Go. Paranoia. This is an interesting role-playing game. We play it about 2, 3, 4 times a year with various friends of mine and bringing people in. Usually it's like, hey, we haven't played Paranoia in 6 months. Let's get a game in. And it suits itself really well to just kind of a gaming session. It's not really a campaign behind it. And we've been playing literally now 20 years. I mean, that's how insane it is, about 20 years on there. Almost yearly, Paranoia. Various editions, various adventures. The idea of the game is for the DM to kill the game master, the computer, the overlord, to kill the players in humorous ways. The players are there to complete the mission, but survive and sell out all the other players in the process. So it takes place in the future. Alpha Complex, the computer controls everything. The computer is paranoid, hence paranoia, because programmers have been messing with it, the high programmers, forever. It essentially thinks that there's plots to destroy it everywhere, and that there's secret societies and various forces working against it, and it pulls you in as a troubleshooter. And what's interesting is you die like crazy in the game. You're going to die like 5 or 6 times in an adventure, but you have a number of clones on there. And of course, there are ways to get future clones. When you run out of clones, your character's done on there. But don't let that fool you. You are going to try and survive as long as you can. So the computer pulls you in as a troubleshooter. But being flawed programming, it's not going to give you all the equipment that you need. It's not going to give you the full story of what you have to do. And at the same time, you need to complete this mission. And if it doesn't, obviously you failed. So obviously your traitors, and it's going to execute you. And it puts you into that perspective on there. And you just have to kind of go through and figure out what's going to happen on there while selling out and trying to frame and try to kill all the other players in the game, because each player is a part of a secret society, and you keep that membership secret to yourself, and there's objectives in there, a lot of different ways to win. It's a role-playing game in that you can't take it seriously. You can't get upset when everyone turns on you. But at the same time, it's just a lot of fun to play. And I love Paranoia. It's not the type of game where I would play it. I don't even think I could play it every week. It is done best in small doses, but it's really, really a lot of fun. And role-playing is very, very serious business. I mean, it is. And we take this very seriously, and we take our hobby very seriously. But sometimes you need to just step back and be like, all the min-maxing, all the power gaming, all the planning, all the strategizing. Sometimes you just want to have some fun and not really worry about anything and just kind of sit back and see where the story takes you. Paranoia does that. So the 3 systems I'm playing right now as of this moment, 95% D&D. Or 90% D&D, 5.0, AD&D 2, but currently right now 5.0. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, not as much as I'd like, but the old world is still alive. And a couple of times a year, Paranoia. Now I'm going to turn it over to the comments. This was only supposed to be about a 5 or 6 minute podcast, but just as I'm thinking about this, man, so many memories I'm exploring, so many great games, and I've already got a list of about 3 or 4 friends that I got to reconnect with and be like, we got to do this. We haven't played in a while. We need to get back and get the dice rolling on here. What systems are you currently playing right now? Is it D&D? Or I should say, in the comments, what's your primary system? What are you playing every week, every month, every time? What systems have you explored in your past? And in terms of unique gameplay or just a lot of fun, what systems do you play, have you played that I should be taking a look at? Because I'm always up for some more and different role-playing games and kind of different ways to explore that social narrative from that gaming perspective.